Hi everybody, TJ Mack of Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. And before I get to today's main topic, I want to showcase these three cards first. The card here on the far left is Gilbert Perreault, and this is his 1975 Topps card. When I was growing up, he was the best player on the Sabres. He centered the famed French Connection line with Rico Martin and Rene Robert. They were just a nightmare for goalies during that time. And Perreault was one of the better end-to-end skaters of his era. Not of the level maybe of Bobby Orr. I don't think anybody really is of that level, but he certainly was one of the better end-to-end skaters in the league at that time, and he used to be fun to watch, taking the puck from behind his own goal, taking it down to the other side, and in some instances, he'd actually take it all the way down and put it in the net. Just a fun guy to watch back in those days. And he was the best player in Sabres history until Dominik Hasek came along, who in my view is the best goalie I ever saw in person anyways. He was just unbelievable, the saves that guy would make. In the center here, you have the first card of Harold Jackson. I've talked about him a couple videos ago, showed a 71 Topps card. Well, this is his first card, which is the 1970 Topps. And Jackson's an unsung receiver of his day. He was the leading receiver in yards, receptions, and touchdown catches of the 1970s, yet has never really received any serious Hall of Fame consideration. And then on the end here, you have the 1981 Topps Willie Stargell. I'm showing this card as a shout out to my friends in the community, John from John P. Collects and Steve from Vintage on Vintage. They started a new series on Steve's channel, which I'll put a link to the first episode below, called Bargain Hunters, where they search for cards at a set amount, and it's certain players they put in a wheel, and then if that player gets selected, then they spin the wheel again for what price point to search for. The first episode was Willie Stargell for $35 or less, and they pulled two nice cards. I'll let you judge for yourself, as I will put the link to that first video down below. So please support them if you would. So now let's go ahead and move on to today's topic. And we've all heard the saying, you can't win them all. And my guess is it was said many times throughout history, but it's actually a quote attributed to a Boston Braves pitcher, Cliff Curtis, who said, "Oh well, you can't win them all," after losing his 23rd consecutive game during the 1910 and 11 seasons. It has also been associated with Philadelphia Athletics manager Connie Mack, who reportedly uttered it after losing 117 games during the 1916 season. Well, the same could be said of our pursuit to acquire cards for our collection. Like many of you, I go on eBay several times a month looking for cards and magazines that fit within my focus. As I discussed in my 2024 goals, at this point in my collecting journey, I'm looking to add about maybe 65 to 120 total cards and magazines a year. It's important for me to grow my collection at a slow and steady pace, and I set up all my eBay searches around cards and magazines that I may be interested in acquiring at some point. I have the same budget each month, and if I don't spend it, it carries over to the next month, and I very rarely deviate from it. That's why I have several cards and magazines I'm interested in targeted ahead of time, and I develop a plan on how I intend to bid on them. If I win items earlier in the month, for example, then it will impact items I bid on later in the month. The same is true if I lose items earlier in the month. It gives me more budget to pursue items later in the month. So I thought it would be fun to look at some of the items I bid on and lost from the beginning of March to early April. It's not all of them, but it's the preponderance of them, and I thought you might be interested in seeing that. I like these kind of videos where you can kind of get in the head of a collector. So I'm going to also include a couple winners in here as well, just to break it up and show you that I'm not a complete loser. So the first item I'm going to show you right now, it's the 1964 Topps American League Bombers card in an SGC5. Now, I tried to win this on March 6th. The card sold for $137.54, and I was the underbidder. And this card is high on my want list because it features four players that I'm very fond of. And I've talked about how when my dad was growing up, he was both a Yankees and a Tigers fan. And the latter was due to my grandfather taking him to Yankees, or to a Detroit game, I'm sorry, when he was a teenager, and he got to see Al Kaline play. And that really resonated with him, and he just kind of followed him from there on out. Now, these were the two of the premier teams in the American League in the 1960s. Of course, the Yankees were a powerhouse in the American League in the first half of the decade, making the World Series every year from 1960 to 1964 and winning 2 times. The Tigers only won 1 World Series in 1968, but they were competitive nearly every year, winning 85 or more games, 8 of the 10 years of the decade. So I'm sorry I missed out on this card, but it's certainly one that I'm going to target again in the future. It's fairly often seen on eBay, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. Next card you don't see quite as often, and it's the 1961 Fleer Charlie Connerly card in a BVG 8. Now, I'm getting into the BVG slabs more and more because I think they're a great value right now. You just need to be selective, like anytime you make a purchase. And I'll get into that more in a bit when I show another card. But this Connerly card is one of my favorite photos in the 1961 Fleer set. It was taken in Yankee Stadium, where the Giants played at the time. And here you see the 40-year-old quarterback, who was also used by Marlboro cigarette companies as the Marlboro Man. And he looks very distinguished here in that old school varsity style jacket with that thick head of hair that is gray at the temples. And this would be the old Warrior's last card as he retired at the end of the 1961 season. Y.A. Tittle had taken his job. I was at my youngest daughter's softball game when this auction ended. It was only at about $10 with a minute and a half left, and I thought I was going to get a steal. And I waited till about 5 seconds left, and I put in a bid for $35 and lost because someone put in a higher snipe bid. Oh well, Charlie's going to have to wait for another day. Now, I did win from the 1961 year, but it's the top set, not the Fleer set, this Chuck Bednarik in an SGC 6.5. And this is the last Bednarik card I needed for his 1950 to 61 Bowman, Topps, and Fleer run. He didn't have a card in 1959 because he had retired that year and came back. And the only Bednarik cards I don't have are his 1948 and 1948 Leaf cards. They both are the same photograph, same image exactly. The difference is the 48's a lot more expensive. It's his true rookie card, I suppose, because it came out in 48 versus the 49 issue. But it's one I'm likely not going to get because it's well over $1,000 in mid-grade. I would like to add the 49, which is much more attainable. So as you know, Concrete Charlie is one of my favorites from that era, and I just real happy to have this card and the other cards I have of him in my collection. Here's a shot of the back. Next auction I bid on and lost was this 1958 Topps Jim Doran, and I'm fond of the 58 football design and photography. The Doran in particular attracted me because of this beat up old helmet he's wearing with all kinds of chips and scuffs and scratches on it. And I would just love to display this card in one of my cases as a reflection of the tough and gritty game football was in that era. Now, Doran was a pretty good wide receiver who played from 1951 to 61 with the Lions and Cowboys. This card sold for $11.55, and I was the underbidder. Now, moving ahead to Easter Sunday, March 31st, I bid on 2 auctions that day. The first is a card that's been on my short list for a while. I talked about it in my 2023 goals. It's this beautiful 61 Parkhurst Jac Plant card. I love the design and coloring on this set. While I have a few Plant cards from later in his career, I want to acquire a card from the late 50s, early 60s, and this is my favorite. Now, I had some money saved up and put what I thought was a strong bid in for this card at $176, but it ended up going for $186.58. Well, things may have worked out, though, even though I didn't win that card. I ended up acquiring a really nice card, and I'm going to give you a little backstory on that. Like I said, I collect on a pretty light or tight budget monthly, and I rarely deviate from it. So the next card I was looking at that day after I lost the Plant card was a 65 Topps Bobby Hull and a PSA 6.5. Turned out there was also a BVG 6.5 closing within a couple hours thereafter. Now, the PSA copy was already well over $100, while the BVG was at $70. I watched the PSA haul sell for $142.83, which seems high for that card. So I decided to make a run at the BVG copy, as I thought it actually looked as nice and it was half the price. As the clock ticked down to less than 10 seconds, I threw a bid in for $86 and ended up getting it for $76, which in my opinion is a steal. It looks great with my other 1965 Topps cards in my collection. I'm just going to show you it right here. This is just a fantastic copy of this card, and I'm just very, very happy to add it. And that's what I'm really doing now with the BVG cards. If I'm seeing stuff that's at a good price and I like the look of the card, I'm going to jump on it because I think there's a lot of good deals to be had out there. And I don't really care if I have PSA, BVG, or SGC holders in my collection. If I like how the card presents, I'm going to make a run at it. They're all reputable companies. My preference is PSA, but I will look to the other two as well. Last item I want to share today is this very interesting item. It's a 62 AFL Football Prospect Recruiting Booklet. I saw this on April 3rd. It was at the spur of the moment when I was looking at another magazine. I had never seen anything like this before. If you watch my channel with any regularity, you know I collect cards of AFL players, and I thought this magazine would be the perfect complement to my collection. Now, the magazine was given to prospective players in an attempt to entice them to join the AFL. It was described as 60 pages filled with photographs, articles, and testimonials by players explaining why joining the AFL is the right choice. Now, the auction was ending in a couple of minutes, and the price was still fairly low, so I threw out a bid of $31 just as a flyer, maybe seeing if I could snag it, but I ended up losing at a snipe bid of $32. The good news is that I found an item that I'll be looking for in the future. So there you have it. This is a snapshot into some of the items I have bid on and tried to win. Now, if I had won the American League Bombers card on March 6th, that would have been my big card of the month, and I likely would not have bid on the other cards that were over $100. I try to keep my money available for mid-level purchases and also set some aside for cards that are on my really short list, such as the 61 Flair Jim Brown, the 51 Bowman Ed Sprinkle, as well as some 48 and 49 Leaf football cards that pop up from time to time. I may or may not have a video out next week. I have several things going on with work and my kids' sports. If not, I'll have a video out the week after. Until then, God bless, and we'll talk again soon.